I've never been doing this to make money. It's one of the risk-adjusted worst ways to try and make money in the world. It has been to have an adventure, to learn things, to develop, to do something that not many people do. And that's, it's also why, at times, like most founders, I've been close to burnout. But at those times, rather than quitting, I've been like, right, how do I change my job to make it sustainable? Because I want to do this.
Hi everybody and welcome to FEBE Founder Stories, and it is with great pleasure that I'm joined by James. Do you ever go by James?
You can call me James, my family.
Hi everybody and welcome to FEBE Founder Stories, and great pleasure to have Jimmy Williams from Urban Jungle today. How are you doing, Jimmy?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for having me along.
Jimmy, one of the best things about the watch list that we've created is when you discover businesses like yours and then you hear the next year that you've gone from that to that, and you've taken a massive leap this year in terms of where the business has gone to. Before we get into that, just in terms of what Urban Jungle does, you're a pretty disruptive force in the insurance world right now. How are you doing that?
Yeah, so I guess the journey started when I started consulting in the insurance space, and basically saw that it was of any industry that I'd ever looked at before, it was the worst. There were so many things broken. No one cared about the customers or
you really felt
what
like
they wanted. Yeah, I think it's just, I don't think it was as a sort of result of malice, but just kind of pure focus on financial numbers and what the outturn was, and no remote thinking about at the end of this kind of risk data that I'm thinking about is a real person, with a real situation, with something really bad going wrong in their lives.
Yeah.
And they're reliant on this company that has suddenly this huge, they bought it on a Saturday afternoon on a comparison website, and then 3 years later, they didn't think actually this person would be trying to put them back on their feet after one of the biggest events they've experienced in their lives. So,
and you're so right. When I think about what insurance has meant to me, it's when the shit has hit the fan and something really inconvenient or bad has happened. So you're right. It's not a pleasant experience in your life when you've actually got to go through that process.
Yeah, and I guess I think we just seen it kind of stagnate and sort of go off the rails, and also just not really get the technology revolution that was happening. I mean, I think particularly, when we started the business, you had e-commerce had been around for 15 years. Amazon's obviously colossal, and just the basics of using the internet to make people's lives better was pretty well embedded in nearly every other sector. And then you go and try and log into your account on an insurance thing, and they say, oh, you have to call us for that. You have to sit on hold for an hour for that. So we're just this really, really backwards industry where no one had done anything interesting. Got quite excited about our ability to just really change things, and kind of, our whole thing is, let's just think about an insurance company from the bottom up, from scratch. If I reinvent everything with technology at the heart, with the customer at the heart, can I do something really different? And that's kind of where we started.
You make it all sound so easy, Jimmy. What is your background?
So I basically was advising insurance companies.
I mean, before that, I'm just thinking, I'm trying to work out in terms of your academic, your arty, sciencey.
More businessy, probably.
Really?
Studied economics at university.
Okay.
I'd kind of always, been quite interested in business. My dad had started a couple of very small sort of one-man band type businesses, so I'd always sort of thought,
It's in the blood.
one day, that would be the thing. But I think the thing I watched and learned from him is that if it's a one-man band business, you do all the work, and that maybe if I was going to do something, I'd hire some people to do it with me so they could do some of the work some of the time.
Well, someone said to me, and I think this is great advice, create a business whereby you can make money whilst you sleep.
Yeah.
And that kind of really, to me, I know the ways you can make money, but yeah, if you've created a system which means it's not relying on you, then that's perfect. So the tech is a massive part of this, and in terms of businesses that we feature, we don't actually feature that many tech businesses. So it's always interesting when you come across tech businesses, because someone's had a thought somewhere that has meant they've created something that has created a big solution to a problem that needed fixing. And I guess that's where it starts with you. You'd seen that there was an underserviced, especially from the customer experience part of the insurance world. So how did that start to build up to get to the point where you then had the technology to get going?
Yeah, so I've got a co-founder business partner, Greg, who's very experienced technologist. So ex-Facebook, ex-Google, you name it, he can build it. So
He's clever. Not saying you're not clever, but but I mean, he's the very, very technically clever.
Yeah, and what we're doing just kind of absolutely requires that. So if you look at our team, even now, roughly half the people are in product or engineering.
Really?
It really is a technology effort, not a kind of logistical and personal effort. So that's really, really important. I think one of the things that really set us up well from the beginning is having spent a lot of time with the companies that are already in the space and just really understanding the problems quite deeply.
Yeah.
And I think, there is that thing when you start out one of these, there were early upstarts that looked very like us, and they had sort of 50% of the same thought process of us, but they missed a couple of like really fundamental things. So there's probably...
What like, Jimmy?
Well, so I think there's basically two big things that we use technology that are, quite differentiated. So one is about everything being self-serve for customers. So there's a thing that happens a lot even with technology companies when you build fast and you scale quickly, you don't automate things. So you say, oh, well, we'll just get our operations team to do that. They'll fix that hole or cover that gap. And we just relentlessly, we looked at the big insurers and said, hey, the big problem they've got is huge call centers, lots of people doing manual processes. Like if we go down the route of not patching the gaps as we grow, we're just going to end up in the same place. So we have a very, very strict rule that we will always automate something before we hire someone, and only hire people to help our customers if it's really an unautomatable problem. So it's something
the automation
really
starts first.
Yeah, so just really, really investing in that right from day one. That has meant some big tech decisions, like we build it ourselves. Like nearly everything we run is custom software because we want it to fix our customers' problems, not a generic customers' problems that is across industry or across our competitors or whatever. So that was one thing, and then the other thing, and that's probably observable to our customers, the first one. So you'll see that you can log into your account and do everything. And I think people do really appreciate that. I think the second bit is about stopping fraud, which will be much more kind of opaque and not very visible to the outside world. But fraud is a huge problem in insurance. So it goes all the way down from someone who is not insured and is like, ooh, I really wish I'd been insured, buying a policy after the thing has happened, which is obviously a reasonable problem, but actually quite small, all the way through to organised crime. So there's some quite...
Organised crime?
So yeah, low-level organised crime, but people buying hundreds of insurance policies, claiming on all of them, trying to money launder.
Right.
So there are a lot of fraud rings across pretty much all personal lines insurance. If you want to know the history of it, it actually started with chip and pin credit cards. Everyone who used to do credit card fraud, when chip and pin came in and they couldn't do credit card fraud anymore, everyone switched to insurance fraud.
Really? So it became really targeted?
So it's a really big problem, and we see loads and loads of it. And so what we do is some quite smart data screening anti-fraud stuff using machine learning, basically to spot the behavior of fraudsters. Yeah. So if you watch enough of them, you watch them carefully enough, and obviously I can't tell you exactly what we watch, but you can spot behaviors which just make them, you realize they're not a genuine customer.
Can I just, I'd like to understand the dynamic between the two of you. So you were consulting in the industry.
Yeah.
So that's, they call it the 10,000 hours. I don't know how many hours, how many years you dedicated to this art, but you did a lot of time working out the understanding and then working out where you thought was the problem.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. But I spent a lot of time building the skills to work out the problem.
Okay.
So I was in consulting for about 7.5 years. I think two of the interesting things I learned there, well, one is like how to understand a business, how to break it down, how to build it back up again, work out where the problems are and fix them. But then also the particular kind of consulting I did was, generally speaking, directly advising CEOs. So maybe I was advising them on strategy or on M&A or whatever it was, but probably in that time worked directly with 60 CEOs of generally pretty successful companies, and that allowed me to just do the pattern spotting of what are the different styles you can adopt, what works, what doesn't work, and kind of bring that into the business, which I'm trying to do. You can ask the team how successfully I'm doing that, but that was very helpful. But then there was definitely a bit right at the beginning where, before we started the company, I just found everyone that would have a coffee with me in the industry and just asked like really, really fundamental questions, like basically like, where does the money go? and who earns what money and what the dynamics are between the different suppliers and what's broken, what's not broken. And it was really interesting that I spoke to, let's say, 50 people across the industry during this time, and no one had a full helicopter view of the industry.
Really?
Everyone understood their little bit really well, and they understood the dynamic between them and their suppliers and them and their distributors, but no one knew what the whole game was. And I think that was really big in terms of sort of setting what our proposition was going to be, was actually just putting all of that together and working out who plays where, who makes the money, how the dynamics trade off, what's the current structure, this bit's more competitive, that bit's less competitive, was really important to kind of working out.
So complex, but actually simple, in the sense that the issue here was people weren't looking at it as an entirety. They were looking at it in particular focused areas. I think that's
right. Before we even launched, we had to build most of the platform that we have today. So
really?
I had to be able to, have a customer be able to come online, buy a policy, come online, cancel, change their policy, start submitting claims. Like nearly all that functionality existed day one. It's a lot better now.
Yeah.
But like version 1 was built we hired a couple of people, raised a very small amount of money at the beginning to hire a couple of people to help build that. But it was like 2 or 3 people kind of building that first version. But yeah, I didn't like that very, very much. We also had this thing, so we're in a regulated space, which is quite tricky, or was quite tricky at the beginning. So you got this kind of 3-way problem where we needed some investment, we needed the regulator to approve us as an entity, and we needed supply. So we needed insurers who wanted to work with us and underwrite our products.
Yeah.
The insurers wanted the investors and the regulator wanted the insurance and the investors wanted the regulator and the supplier. And so there was a very complex sort of loop of trying to tell all of them at the same time, yeah, it's going really well with the others, it's going to happen, until that became reality. So there was this kind of,
Which I guess would have been pretty stressful. Not easy to do.
Yeah, it's certainly hard, and definitely because at that stage, like now we've got probably 20 balls in the air that we're juggling in terms of growth, in terms of initiatives and things that we're improving. And if one of those drops, you're kind of like, well, I've got another 19, it's not a big deal. But when you're in those early days, if one of those balls drops, so I remember there was a supplier we were really close to landing to be our big supplier, and out of the blue, they just pulled it out. And it was just like, right, this whole thing's not going to work. We're done. All the work we'd done for 3 months was kind of in the bin. And then fortunately we went, found someone else quite quickly just by sort of serendipity. But that kind of early stage, it's just a very different challenge to now. It's kind of much more all or nothing than it is when it's sort of a bit more of an established business.
And you're up to a team of 70 people now?
Yeah.
How have you found that kind of period of really going from the 2 of you to now serious responsibility? Because that's a lot of people.
It's by far my favourite bit, is the people bit. And you do talk to other founders and they're like, oh, it's really annoying having all these people you have to like manage and do HR and all that stuff. There's nothing more I love than like getting in deep on either helping an individual directly with their development or helping our people managers develop their people. I've just always naturally been very interested in it and find it fun. So now we have some people who do things. I really love that. There's nothing I like more than going away on holiday and coming back and loads of things having been done. So we have this.
That's interesting.
We use Slack at work, and we've got a wins channel. And the good thing about the wins channel is when you first get back from holiday and you've got 3,000 emails and all these Slack messages to reply to, is you open up your Slack first of all when you get in. The first thing you do is you hit the wins channel. It's just everything that's gone well while you've been away. And if there's 8 or 10 things in that wins channel, and they could be as simple as someone accepted a job offer, or we shipped this quite small new feature, but it's always good news in there, and that's really evident. Real buzz,
obviously.
Yeah. And the fact the stuff that just happens that
it's almost like I can imagine you're getting excited to come back from holiday to see that.
Yeah, I like holidays.
But for you, it's one of the most rewarding aspects of the fact that you're building a team that can get stuff done when you're not there, and that is the art of building a scalable, successful business, right?
Yeah, I think we've always accepted that the most important thing we can do is hire well and build a really strong culture, and we've invested pretty heavily in that. So
there's been a big growth spurt over the past 12 months. What has driven that growth spurt?
Yeah, so a combination of some great work and some good luck, which I guess is like all these things are. So from our point of view, we started as a business in renters insurance, so contents only for your flat if you're renting, and then we launched into homeowners in 2021. So you're talking about 2022 financial year in terms of our growth. So we launched into homeowners. That we taken everything that we'd learned from renters and put all of those learnings into homeowners, and it just, from a customer perspective, worked straight away. People got it. People understood why it was different. We grew very, very quickly. So there's a good chunk of...
And sorry, Jimmy, remind us, because this is clearly a really strong USP. It is different because...
So we've mentioned already how the technology helps us be lower cost.
Yep.
So because everything's automated, we don't need to have huge call centers.
Yep.
Because we're good at spotting fraud. We're able to underwrite more efficiently. So the customer gets great value is like one of the things we're able to do. So it's not just discounting to give them a good price, but it's like genuinely we're just structurally cheaper. And then the other thing we do is we redesign the insurance product from scratch. So we'd observed that insurance products were generally designed still to be sold by a high street broker.
Yeah.
Super complex. You get in there and the broker knows everything. And they can talk you through all the minutiae of the different terms and why this product's different to that product. And we were like, no one does that online. No one's even thinking about that. So
We're not.
Yeah, so there was a huge process where we went back to the drawing board, redesigned insurance product from scratch, made it much simpler, much easier to understand, much easier to buy online, just redesigned a whole, effectively e-commerce experience for insurance. And so from, customer point of view, it's really clear where you're buying, it's really easy to do, and it's great value. So those are the things
It's pretty compelling, right?
that are working.
How do you? Everyone still expects a level of customer service. How do you deliver on that? If that's an element where you're able to drive quite a significant saving.
Yeah, so it kind of that. You're right that that's a question that we get, but actually what happens is because everything's automated, we can deliver really great customer service.
I see. Right.
Basically what it means is that when someone's coming to us, there's something genuine wrong. It's not just, hey, I want to update my card details. It's like, you can just do that online. You don't even need to contact us. So when we get...
that filters out so much.
Filters out so much of the volume. So what we're getting is weird and wonderful. What that also then means is for the team that we hire to do that, it's a much more interesting job to deal with weird and wonderful than it is to be like, this is how you input your card details. It's a much more interesting job. So... And they're solving real customer problems, and they're, generally speaking, it's, I don't know, I've got an exotic fish tank. If that smashed, would that be covered on the policy? It's quite sort of personalised things, and then you've got to go and work out whether it is.
So it's more interesting.
Yeah. So we have incredibly high service levels in terms of how we respond to customers. So I think our average response time to an email is 8 minutes or something.
Wow.
Because everything
8
is automated.
minutes?
Yeah.
That's tremendous. Wow. How have you found going from rookie founder to CEO with a family of 70 people? That's a jump. Because some people find the step difficult, others love it. The number of people that love it is much lower, I think, than the numbers that kind of eventually say, I'm going to step aside now. Where do you sit in that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And actually, the event last year from the awards, I met quite a lot of different founders, and there are a few people who've been on that journey where they were the founder and they'd stepped aside and let a kind of professional CEO run things. So I'm probably a little bit unusual in founders. So a lot of founders, again, you build a network of people because we all like complain to each other about about life as a founder, and you get a feel for things. And a lot of people, the reason they become a founder or a CEO is because no one will hire them. They're kind of like, I won't listen to advice. I won't do what other people tell me. And I'm just unhireable, so I'm going to do this thing. And then they're often very good in the early stages because they're just super hardcore, and they move fast, and no one can tell them to stop, and they get things done. And then often those people are the ones who just sort of do step aside. I was the other way around.
Why? Because maybe their energy starts to drop. Because
I think often they enjoy it. They enjoy it less because they enjoy the people stuff less, perhaps. Or there's a big part of my job now which is dealing with investors, for example.
Yeah, we'll get onto that in a moment. That's interesting.
Yeah, but which they don't enjoy, but I do enjoy. I think
because you like people.
I like people. I think also I'd done my 7 years of research, right? So I'd worked with all these different CEOs and seen what the job was. And I think the thing for me was like, I just quite wanted to have that job. And so the thing is like, my ultimate goal was to be CEO of a big company. the two ways to go about that. You can either go join as a more junior at a big company and try and work your way up to CEO, or start a company where you're CEO from day one, try and make the company big, which is a more risky version of the strategy. But that is essentially what I've chosen. So I guess it's harder for me to complain about it when it's kind of my chosen career path.
So investment, you've had to raise quite a lot of money to get to this level?
Yeah, so we've raised about 30 million in total so far.
Which is no small number.
Yeah, it's a reasonable amount.
What has that experience been like? Is it something that at the beginning is really, really difficult and gets easier, or does it actually get harder? I mean, what is experience for like? I guess what I'd love to, Jimmy, 30 million is a meaty number. You've obviously got a knack of how to do it. It'd be lovely to give some nuggets to people watching this in terms of, right, if you're raising money, these are some of the things that I think you should be thinking about.
Yeah, sure. So it is always hard, really hard. Really, really hard. That's the number one thing for everyone. You talk to people who've raised hundreds of millions. Like, it is incredibly difficult. Part of the reason it's difficult is because you're always pushing it up against your upper limit. So, especially if you're doing kind of venture-backed things like we've done, you want to be able to, because you want to fund your growth and you want to raise as much as possible to fund your and invest in growth. You're always trying to raise at the highest valuation you possibly can. So you're always trying to squeeze people as hard as you can to get to the limit. So, what would be really easy, so our last round was 16 million. At that round, so the first round we raised was 1 million. For me to raise 1 million now is really easy, but I'm not trying to raise 1 million now.
You're trying to raise
I'm trying to 16. So it does just linearly get harder. It never gets better. So I think that there is a big thing that I wish I perhaps had learned earlier, which is like, this is just my job. Getting good at it and getting used to doing it that's the thing I'm going to have to repeatedly do. And whether it is like raising money from new investors or looking after existing investors, like that's part of the CEO's job, is to look after that side of things. I think I've got lots of things that I've learned along the way, which I guess people could construe as tips. I think one of the things people don't do enough is think about it as a skill.
Yep. Interesting. What do you mean?
Yeah, so one of the things I definitely have learned along the way that I guess would give to people as a tip is that fundraising is definitely a skill. It's definitely something that you can learn and get better at, whether that is learning how to pitch better, whether it's learning how to put together your deck properly, whether it's learning how to put your financial model together properly, whether it's running a pipeline properly. So I think like every round we've done, I guess if I'd like really trimmed down the process, maybe we could have spoken to 20 investors and got it done.
Yeah.
But in reality, I always knew that we had to speak to 100 investors, because what you really want is a competitive dynamic. You want 3, 4, 5, 6 bidders.
Right.
So that you can play them off against each other and get the best price, and the best terms is typically the most important thing rather than price.
Yeah.
Because typically they're always quite similar on price. So I think if you kind of have that knowledge of what it takes to run a good process, like me now as a fundraiser is significantly better than me previously. I actually did a really good training course on fundraising. So it's called Fundraising Bootcamp. I'll give them a name check, where they literally just take you through all of those skills. So it's run by a couple of people who have a lot of fundraising experience, and they basically, one of the main things they do is they take you through the best practice of some of the things I've mentioned about like running a funnel, but also they just make you pitch again and again and again and again, and give you really blunt feedback about how good it was. So
Which is the best way to learn, right?
You do it with you do it with a group. So you have the sort of coach there, but you also do it with a group of 5 or 6 peers. And what's really interesting is how quickly you spot the mistakes that everyone else makes.
Okay.
When they're pitching, you're like, you say things like, remember there's one of the guys in our group, and I just heard him speak, and it's just like, wow, it's really clear that in the field that you're in, you are absolutely an expert. You're like, just your expertise just oozes out of you. I have no idea what your company does, but I know that you are an expert in whatever the field is. And then, we obviously worked together, and by the end, his pitch was like, perfect. And then there was bits of that in my pitch that I also then was like, oh, hang on, I do that as well. Which, I did that.
Jimmy, what is the structure of a perfect pitch then? Like, like a book has a beginning, a middle, and end. What is the dynamic with a really great pitch?
So, I think one of the big things is to have the right pitch for you as a founder.
Right.
So I personally never take a deck to a meeting. I will just run it like a conversation. And I'll
Right.
tell a story, and there'll be no slides, no numbers. I'll use numbers a lot in my speech, but if for me, if I have to say a slide deck, I've failed. It's just like we are connecting as humans. And for me as well, even when picking investors, I want someone who's going to connect with me as a human. And that's the first thing I'm really looking for. And then we can get to numbers later. And ideally, someone else does the numbers. But for other people, that's not how they work. That's not how they're the most impressive, most convincing. Some people are very, very good at presenting, slide by slide and taking you through the story like that. And so there is a bit, you've got to find your own style. I think there's a lot of basics that you can get right. So people mess up stuff like they don't have their laptop charger, so their phone dies when they're doing a Zoom call. They turn up on time. When they're turning up, they set their laptop screen so that it doesn't point like into the sky and you can only see the top of their head. There's loads of basics that you see people get wrong all the time.
So work to your style, get the basics right because they're the basics, but get the basics right.
Yeah, I think then the other thing is one of the big things you need to do is not get phased when people say no.
Okay, that's good advice. Yeah.
As I said, we've regularly we've done rounds. We talked to over 100 investors, and we're getting 6 offers, which I think most people would say getting 6 offers for funding round is incredible. So, but the reality of that means 94 no's.
Way more no's than yeses.
Yeah. And what's particularly brutal about them, a lot of investors have their meetings where they make these decisions on a Monday. So you get the email either on a Monday night or a Tuesday morning.
Right.
And those Monday nights and Tuesday mornings are brutal.
Yeah.
And you just have to you just have to be good at saying to yourself, they were rubbish anyway. And just get on to the next one and not be phased about it.
Yeah, so I'm a massive admirer of the American mentality on many things with entrepreneurialism, and that is really embracing failure, getting people to really talk about it and share it and not be scared of it. So, one of the, I guess, cheeky questions I always like to ask is, what is one of the biggest fuck-ups you've done in business? And I guess, why are you glad that it happened and what did it teach you?
Yeah, so perhaps not really answer your question, but here we go. So I think you're right that it being okay to fail is really important. So culturally, that's hugely, we try and embed that with the team. Whereas the time you should feel the most loved by everyone else in the team is when you've made a big mistake.
Yeah.
Because everyone makes mistakes, and we want to have an environment. I think I mentioned earlier about how we want people to be able to be empowered to make decisions on their own, and sometimes they're not very experienced and they will make the mistakes, but that's the model, is when you're trying to grow really fast. I think if I'm good at one thing as a CEO is not making too many mistakes. That's my style, because I'm just like a massive overthinker.
Really?
So I will think through all the 10 different downsides that could happen and do all my best to mitigate them. So maybe I'll miss, some upside that someone else will have found because they took the risk earlier, risk more mistakes. So I'm sure there are lots. The other thing is that I'm very good at is just completely forgetting my mistakes after I've made them.
Yeah. Don't dwell on it.
It's just gone from my head, so I don't have a list.
That's great.
It's one of the problems, which makes the question quite hard to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I have so much respect for that, because a lot of us dwell on that and it eats at us and drives us crazy. And actually, it's so counterproductive. It's negative. It gets rid of energy that could be used to do something better. So I think that's really great advice. Get it out of your head.
Yeah, I guess what I'm actually obsessed with is the mistakes that I think I'm about to make. So my anxiety is triggered by future mistakes that may happen or events that may happen, and not things that happened in the past, because you can't control those.
Yeah, you've probably met. I guess you said you've spoken with a lot of CEOs when you were doing this. You've had a lot of conversations with a lot of investors. What are some of the nuggets that you have drawn from these people in terms of some of the great advice that you've kind of really taken on and you want to share?
So again, I'm not going to answer your question properly. I just don't take advice. I don't like it. So
Really?
maybe there's one piece of advice which I probably got off the internet, which is no advice is good, or all advice is useless. I think.
Now this is interesting though. Why? Why is it? Why is it that, like you're saying that for a reason? In terms of there's obviously something inbuilt in you which is very cautious of taking advice.
I think, yeah, just being around the block a few times, you start to realise that everyone's got an interest that they're not telling you about. So when someone gives you advice, it's always charged. They always have different. No one is perfectly aligned with your interests. So they're just not qualified to give advice. They don't know what you know. They don't know your business. They don't know your context. And they do have other interests that are not yours. And like investors are great examples of that. Existing ones or people that want to invest, they'll tell you, give you all this like, oh, we saw this in another business. You're like, well, you look back 2 years later, that business has gone bust. So like clearly that wasn't great advice. But what they mean is like, my strategy as an investor is this. My returns are based on businesses that deliver a certain returns profile in that way. And so I advise all my businesses to do this. And that's not the right thing for the business. So I do seek a lot of advice, but it's very specific.
Okay.
So what I will do is try and assemble around me. So I have very targeted things. So we have a great chairman, ex-FTSE 100 CEO. We're very close. We catch up, like a good catch up every couple of weeks, or we go through everything. But what I will do is I'll package my biggest problems, and I'll say, here's what I'm thinking about doing about my biggest problems. What do you think? So I'm not saying, what do you think with that? I'm saying, I'm intending to do this. This is why. And then I'll get him to challenge me and disagree with me and maybe share some experience of where he's seen similar things before. But one of the big things that is good about that is that you are forced to articulate your argument for why you're going to do something.
Yeah.
You write down the pros, you write down the cons, and you're like, but on balance, I'm going to do this thing in a way that for these other, even just getting that out of your own head is really, really valuable. But then also having an experienced person who's done your job before at scale telling you that sounds mad or not mad. And, probably, again, 90% of the time he agrees with me, and then 10% of the time he's like, no, you're being mad, don't do that. And it explains why, and explains why I've missed something or forgotten something or whatever. So I find specific advice very helpful, general advice useless. And so I try to, and I guess the other place I get advice from is, again, I've probably referenced it a couple of times already, just like I have a very big network of other entrepreneurs that I've deliberately sought out, whether it's actually do a group coaching thing with 4 or 5 other entrepreneurs of similar stage businesses, but also just friends. You meet people. It is a very quirky job, and it's not like you have anyone else at your organisation who does exactly the same job. So I've got a co-founder, which is great, and we're very close, but even his job's not the same as mine, and having other people in exactly the same situation as you doing the same quirky job is super valuable. So I'm on WhatsApp groups with them, meet up with them for dinner or whatever, and just share all the war stories. And again, there's not much advice given in those things, but there is like, this happened to me and I learnt this, and you kind of take nuggets from that where you're like, oh yeah, that did happen to me too, and I wish I'd done it that way.
Okay, so awesome. So finally then, where do you think this is, what can we look forward to in terms of reading, seeing, hearing about what Urban Jungle is going to be doing in the future? You've mentioned obviously there's other elements of insurance you want to go into. What does it look like, the future?
Yeah, so I think for both Greg and I, right from the beginning, our main interest was in building something huge, and so
huge.
We didn't want to do kind of a small, highly profitable from day one business and just spend 30 years growing this thing. To something material. We wanted it to be material fast. That's why we've raised investment. That's why we've done the venture capital thing, because we wanted to do something big. It is, as I've mentioned, I get a real big kick out of hiring people, out of growing organisations, about how to make an org work at scale. So the more we can grow, the more I can do the thing that I want to do, which is hire great people and have a lot of fun seeing them develop. Yeah. So in terms of like specifics, we're in home insurance already. We want to be. There's scope for us to be 100x what we are now, just in that market. So we can do that. We'll add new markets. Ultimately, we'll think about doing international things.
When you've absolutely nailed.
When we've nailed our kind of core thing. Yeah. But I think certainly for me, I'm I've never been doing this to make money. It's one of the risk-adjusted worst ways to try and make money in the world. It has been to have an adventure, to learn things, to develop, to do something that not many people do, and that's, it's also why, at times, like most founders, I've been close to burnout. But at those times, rather than quitting, I've been like, right, how do I change my job to make it sustainable? Because I want to do this for 10 years.
What have you done? Burnout is such a topical thing. It's so relevant, obviously, for founders, because by nature they're such obsessive people.
Yeah.
How do you dial up or down certain things to stop the burnout really taking hold?
Yeah, it's really hard. And ultimately, well, for me anyway, I don't think anyone was ever going to have a word with me, particularly because I'm good at hiding it. When I'm stressed, because that's kind of my job. But it is sort of sitting down with yourself and having a bit of recognition. It's like, hey, if it's this stressful for the rest of my life, like I'm going to die. I'm only 38. I'm going to die at 50 or whatever, right? Because it's just not sustainable. Or I'm going to have to quit. The next best alternative to me is someone doing all those things, and they wouldn't have all the experience that I have of running this business, and hopefully sort of setting it up for scale or whatever. So once you kind of get that in your head a bit more, you can be a bit more like, well, I will, take time for exercise. I will not constantly grab lunch on the go and actually have half an hour in my diary to go and sit down and eat a proper meal, so that I've got enough energy for the afternoon. Like it's all like really basic stuff.
Little things, yeah.
Really, really basic stuff.
That in accumulation starts to take.
But well, I don't listen to advice, but if I did have a piece of advice for the founders, get a PA before you think you need one.
Really?
For me, I sort of put it off. And
why?
Money. It's like,
do it yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, I can do it myself.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly capable of working out my own travel, running my own diary. I think so. I have a fantastic assistant. She used to work with me at my old company, but before my boss, so I knew and trusted her really, really well. But she just works for us on a fractional basis. So she literally sort of does it by the hour. And I think that's a very common model now for a lot of virtual EAs. And so it was literally, I was sitting there struggling, doing a job that I'm not very good at. And something that stressed me out, which is constantly going back and forth in people's diaries. I now have someone who is incredible at it. She's a super professional person. The initial outlay started off, it was kind of 2 hours a week, which cost the company next to nothing. Now she does a lot more. She's great, and we value everything she's doing. But that for me was a huge unlock, because also she tells me off when I'm getting close to burnout. Like really? she can tell. She's like, your diary's a mess. You're doing too much. She'll do things like, I put an hour in the diary for you to have lunch tomorrow because you seem tired.
Really.
And so, having that sort of thing, having people in your life that are looking after you, looking out for you, that's another way you can kind of hack the system.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I'm definitely, that noise would have come through then. Yeah, that's great. That for me is, what you're basically saying is don't get bogged down in the things that isn't your strength and is actually stopping you from doing the things that you're really good at.
Yeah.
So don't put it off. Jimmy, I've loved hearing this story. As I said, one of the most gratifying things from our point of view, I guess linked to what you were saying about loving seeing people develop, to spotted you last year and to then see where the business has gone to, and we get a real kick out of that. So huge congratulations for what you're doing with Urban Jungle. It's a brilliant name, by the way. So, I'm sure this is going to become in no time a household name.
That's the idea.
That's the idea, isn't it? It's got to be with a catchy name like that. So, wishing you all the best. And thanks a massive part of being of FEBE, and can't wait to keep on just bringing you together with those peer-to-peer experiences with other founders, and thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks very much for having me. Great to chat.